G'day folks, welcome back. So what we're going to do this afternoon is we're going to have a look at little things that we can do to help avoid crane accidents. Any crane accident is one too many. And there are some little habits that if we get into these habits, it will stop a majority of them going over. Because most crane accidents are avoidable just by doing a few simple things. Now, one of the first things we're going to look at is one of the most basic ones during your setup is to make sure you pin your outriggers. Now, I know that a lot of people out there think, well, pinning your outriggers, it's no big deal, it's not going to do anything. Those pins do serve a really big purpose. All right. Now, what we'll have a look at is when you set up your crane. So if you've got your crane set up here, right, I'm an awesome artist, by the way, so just ignore the drawing. You've got your outriggers out and down. Now, when the crane's sitting there, all the weight is supposed to be carried on your rams here, which is fine. It'll sit there all day, every day. Now, the problem is when you start getting close to your limit, the crane starts to lean towards this way, all right? So it starts to get a bit of a lean that way. May not even be noticeable, but what that does is that then pushes all the pressure on this ram here. And that ram isn't designed to hold the weight of the crane. So the minute it starts getting it, it's going to start sneaking in. And the little bit it sneaks in, the worse it's going to get, and all of a sudden it's just going to go in and the crane's going to go over onto its side. Now you might say, well, I'm in my limits, it's not going to go over there. But don't forget, sometimes it's just the little minor things that just go wrong. So you might be right on your limit and you think, yep, it's all good. But the doggy or the rigger hasn't quite got it over the center. So you go to lift it, it swings out, and it just puts that extra little force on the crane to lift it up, which then pushes on this ram here. So for the 10 seconds that it takes when you set the crane up, just to walk around and push those pins in, all right, it's going to save a whole lot of heartache. So do yourselves a favor, as soon as you push those outriggers out, put the pins in. Now, another thing, when we're talking about setup, now quite often what we'll do is we will set the crane up on half outriggers so that we can then use the crane to position the pads. Now, and look, I've been guilty of doing this myself and not changing the computer. But what you got to remember is when you're putting your pads down, you're booming up a fair way. So as you boom up, it's throwing the weight over the back. Don't put your counterweights on, do your pads first before you do your counterweights because it's going to throw all that extra weight over the back. But also, put into your computer that every time you go onto half outriggers, doesn't take very long just to change your computer. Tell the computer that you've got those half outriggers and it will stop you from doing anything silly. I know we're all in a bit of a rush and all right, we've already got the computer set up for full outriggers. We're only going on half to throw the pads. She'll be right, we'll just throw the pads out and then we'll push them out to full. Tell the computer you've got half outriggers. That way the computer and the crane will save you from doing anything you're not supposed to do. All right, and also remember, make sure you do your pads before you do your counterweight because all that extra weight hanging over the back, that's going to avoid you getting into trouble as well. Now, another thing that I see quite often, and when you think about it when you're setting up, so always have a look around for any of those underground surfaces. But here's the thing with the underground surface, and I've seen this quite a bit too. So let's get rid of this. So let's say we found some underground surfaces here, and our building's here, and we want to throw something up on the building. Now, what people have got to do is you can't set up on the underground surfaces, obviously. So they'll see the underground surfaces, so they'll set the crane up back here. And they'll get further away from what they need to do. But what you can also do, rather than setting up away from it, is just straddle it like that. Okay, so if you're straddling it, each outrigger is going to be roughly 3 meters away from this underground surface. Right? You don't always have to move back away from it. You can actually get closer and just straddle it. So just because the underground surface is there doesn't mean you've got to stand the other side of it. All right, so think about that. Also, another one is swimming pools and things like that. You will quite often be setting up on driveways. Never a good thing. Always look at how thick the driveway is. Remember, they're only designed for cars. They're not designed for big heavy cranes and things like that. So make sure you do use adequate pads or timbers under it, just to make sure you spread the weight of that load. All right, so they're just a few little things you can do. All right, but always remember, whatever configuration the crane is in, make sure you put that configuration into the computer. If you do that, the crane will stop you from doing anything silly. All right, so if you need to go on half outriggers, even if it's just to throw your pads out, still put it into the computer. Now, another common misconception that I've seen over the years is this one. When we're talking about half outriggers, a lot of people have, and I've heard them say it a number of times over the years, that if you've got full outriggers on one side and short on the other, for whatever reason, as long as you're working over the full outriggers, you can use your full outrigger chart. So let's imagine, here's our crane set up here. Right, we've got full outriggers here, and we've got half outriggers here. If we're working over this side, okay, when you boom down a radius, yeah, sure, it's going to tell you that you're still good for it. But what you've got to remember, and this is where, if you don't put it in the computer, this is where it will catch you out. It only takes a moment of lapse of concentration, but when you boom that crane up, all the weight is going to then come over to the back of the crane. It only takes that one momentary lapse of concentration and to forget you've got those half outriggers. You boom up, all the weight comes over your short outriggers, and then she's going to go toppling over backwards. So it doesn't matter if you've only got one that's only partly in. All right? Always tell the computer you're on half outriggers, and that way it will avoid you allowing to do that. Okay, so they're just a few little handy tips to try and avoid doing those silly little things. Remember, a lot of it's just a mindset. Just get into the mindset of doing these things every time you're in those configurations. Put it into your computer. All right. Whenever you set up, make sure you pin your outriggers. If you're going half outriggers, tell your computer they're half outriggers. Do these little things and get in the habit of doing them all the time, and you'll find that things are always going to be a lot safer. If you see other blokes in the yard not pinning their outriggers, just give them a tap on the shoulder and just explain to them what can go wrong. The more people we get doing it, the less accidents we're going to have. All right? So I hope you take note of a few of these little things and keep in those habits. All right? Thanks for listening, and I'll see you again in the next video.